The Scholar is probably the most interesting character in this game. From his stats, the skills, his overall design is just very unique. He definitely is designed to be a support-based character, but he still can fill multiple different roles, and even in solo play, he can be powerful too. But for today, we are just going to review this character, break him down, tell you guys exactly how you should be playing him, and multiple different ways that you can play him. And no, I'm not going to talk about Deep of Night whatsoever. I'll save that conversation for a later date. But starting off with, we're going to touch on his stats, which is definitely the weakest part about the character. There are some certain types of relics out there that can change up these character stats, but we'll talk about those ones in a bit. But yeah, this guy does have some decent health and stamina with those B scalings, although they're kind of more like a B minus. Because when compared to the Executor, who also has B scalings in health and stamina, he's just going to have higher numbers. But that B scaling that he does get in FP can be kind of nice if he also had some amounts of synergy with spells, which he does not, because all 4 of the major damaging stats, he just gets a terrible scaling in, either a mixture of C's or D's. And the only damaging stats that he gets a decent scaling in is Arcane, which thankfully it is an S scaling. It actually is the highest Arcane in the entire game. Like, even though the Executor also has an S scaling in Arcane, this guy almost has twice as much Arcane. And it just makes me question why From Software still commit to using the lettering system. But this stat spread does make him very limited when it comes to using certain types of weapons. There aren't many arcane weapons to begin with in this game, so trying to fish for them can be very challenging, especially because that he's already likely to find thrusting swords, which doesn't actually have an arcane option. And even then, most of the arcane-based weapons actually tend to scale better off strength or dexterity, so that it's going to end up being better with other characters. But if you do manage to find one of these weapons, it's still going to perform perfectly fine with him. And in fact, there are 2 weapons that do have a pure arcane scaling and an S scaling in that stat, in the Ripple Blade and the Ripple Crescent Halberd. If you manage to get either one of these weapons with the Scholar, he could do just as much damage as almost any other melee character in the game, especially with the Ripple Blade, which this weapon gets an exceptionally fast moveset for an axe, and it's to the point that it's basically just as fast, if not faster than a curved sword, while actually getting more damage than the Wilder with axes. Now, the downsides for this weapon is that it's not going to be consistent to try and find. Even if you do run dormant axes, it's still one of 5 blue options, and it can't be infused, so certain points of interest just won't even have it altogether. However, there are a handful of points of interest that do have Albinorics as enemies, and you can try and kill them and potentially farm for this weapon, but it's not something that I would necessarily rely on. And the fact that it is an arcane-based weapon and it doesn't come with a status effect kind of hurts it a little bit as well, because you definitely want to take advantage of status effects when using the Scholar. Because if you don't know, status effects do scale off the arcane stat, doesn't matter which one it is, you just end up proccing the status effect faster with the Scholar compared to any other character. So for the most part, when you are playing the Scholar in a team, you're pretty much just going to be spamming status effects the entire time, which is going to be perfectly fine and serviceable as a support-based character. But if you did want to play solo or did want to actually get some decent amount of damage, it's actually not going to be that good. If 90% of your damage is coming from status effects, you're not a good damaging character. Now, one build that you can run with that will take advantage of this S scaling and arcane and get some good damage would be a Bloodblade build. This Asher War does scale purely off arcane, and it is going to get the most amount of damage with the Scholar and also have the fastest status build up. So if you did want to use a really good damaging build without having to change up his stats, then Bloodblade would be the way to go. Otherwise, you're just going to be using some very hard-hitting things that don't come with scalings. As we'll talk about in a bit, the Wraith Calling Bell and the Pots can be decent options. But another option you can go with would be like dormant crossbows and potentially fishing for the pulley crossbow. That could do perfectly fine as well. But yeah, unfortunately, the character is very limited when it does come to the damaging department. Now, I did just briefly touch on it, but this character is likely to find thrusting swords, which can be pretty decent because you have a very good chance of always finding things like the Ansper Rapier and the Frozen Needle, which do offer some pretty good status effects, which is obviously really nice to have with an arcane character. Now, unfortunately, there is no arcane scaling thrusting sword, nor is there a guaranteed bleed option too. And also, when it does come to status effect weapons, the base damage of them gets lowered drastically. So say if you do find the Ansper Rapier and the Frozen Needle, once you end up proccing Frost and Rot, you want to be able to switch to a harder hitting weapon that doesn't have a damage penalty. And unfortunately, there isn't another purple weapon that fills that category. So you're going to have to rely on some amount of RNG just to try and find another decent damaging weapon for this character. But to talk about the thrusting sword moveset itself, it is perfectly fine. Unfortunately, it's not going to be anywhere near as fast as the regular thrusting sword moveset, which that was the biggest selling point for the thrusting sword, in that its one-handed and two-handed moveset did help maximize the range, did have a nice lunge, and just have really fast movesets, which those things really aren't present here. For some reason, it doesn't feel like he lunges as far, especially with the two-handed moveset. And with all those combinations of swiping attacks, although it can be nice for trying to hit multiple enemies or some like really skinny types of enemies, it means he's gonna have longer animations and not really offer as much DPS. And in terms of the power stancing thrusting sword moveset, that is still the exact same, and that also does have those like longer types of animations because they don't have the movesets hit simultaneously, which definitely hurts the DPS. So for damage, it doesn't really do that well, but there are a couple of things that his unique thrusting sword moveset does offer. One is going to be the range that he gets with his charged heavy attack. It lunges in very far in a nice 1-2 hit. And also his running heavy attack does close in the gap very quickly too and offers some nice damage. But the best part about his moveset is going to be his feinting attack, which if you don't know, you can actually cancel your charged heavy attack, which does this like unique backstepping animation, which typically does not get iframes, but for this character, it does. And better yet, you can actually cancel your light attack as well. So any single time that you're getting caught in an animation, you can actually dodge and potentially avoid it and not take any damage altogether while doing damage in return. And if you wanted to know, the feint light attack actually does more damage than a regular light attack, while actually coming out a bit faster. Now, the downside is that it does have you lunge back a bit further, and you can follow back up with like a backstepping attack, but unfortunately this combo isn't really going to offer more DPS than the straight up R1 spamming. But if you do have like really short openings, then you can just try to combo in this feinting attack to just try and maximize your damage, but although it can be a bit more challenging to try and pull off. Now, normally when I do my character reviews, I don't really talk about this much, but it definitely is worthy to note, and that is going to be his dodge. The Scholar does get a unique dashing dodge, which is just going to be worse than a dodge roll. And I'm sure every single person that has played the Scholar definitely has felt this man's dodge and just being pretty poor and is noticeably worse than a regular dodge roll. It just doesn't go as far, nor does it have many frames. So when it comes to like dodging these like really annoying AoEs, especially that the new bosses tend to have, it's just going to be a lot harder than usual. I don't really know exactly what the design process was for this. Maybe this character was purely designed just so they can have it be a support-based character, just standing further back. Like, it's not the worst dodge in the entire world. It's like you're playing the Guardian and the game like forces you to use your shield 90% of the time. But the fact that you don't have like a guaranteed really good shield as a backup kind of makes the dodge feel a bit shitty and have it be a character that I don't really ever care to run in solo play. But for now, we're going to go move on into his abilities, starting off with the passive ability, Bagcraft. This is easily the most powerful part about the character. It does two separate things. One, it allows you to hold twice as many consumables. So instead of being able to hold 2 exalted flesh, you can now hold 4, which that as a passive effect in itself is already really good. But there's also a secondary part about this passive that allows him to level up these items too. You can level up these items by using them, which for just regular buffs, all you have to do is just consume it. But when it does come to damaging based items, you do have to hit an enemy with it just to be able to level it up. And depending on the item will be dependent on like how quickly you can be able to level it. Something like a throwing knife can be very easy to level up because you can just buy an infinite amount of these and you can spam them very quickly. But the good thing about leveling up these items is that they're categorized. So if you level up one throwing knife, all other throwing knife adjacent items also get leveled up alongside with it. All the pots will be under one category, all the boluses will be one, so on and so forth. Now there are 2 additional levels to every single item. As level 2, they will just end up getting better in terms of numbers, whether it mean things like more damage negation or just like more damage. And at level 3, they'll end up getting a cool and secondary effect. Now, there are lots of different items in this game, and I'm not going to sit here and read out every single change and every single bonus effect that these things get. But one thing I can offer is my opinions on which ones are the most valuable and which ones you should be playing around for every single expedition. Now, by far the most important items for your expedition will be those buffs that you can eat. So the boiled crabs, boiled prawns, pickled turtlenecks, and the exalted flesh, those all fall under the exact same category, also with the gold and silver pickled fowl feet. So any single time that you find these items throughout your expedition, just constantly keep spamming them so you can get them to level 3, because every single one of them is extremely valuable. The boiled crabs and the boiled prawns do get upgraded to get 5% more damage negation, but when they get to level 3, they can increase your HP bar by 30%. And with the items confer effects to allies relic, you're going to be keeping your teammates alive as well. Now, the Exalted Flesh is also a body buff, so unfortunately it's not going to stack with the boiled crab or the boiled prawn, but if you're confident in yourself or your team and staying alive, then you could just use this instead to just further enhance the damage of your team. And what this does at level 3 is that it now offers 30% more damage to your physical sources, but it also now adds 20% more damage to elemental sources. So if you're using elemental types of weapons, or if you have teammates using spells, you can use an Exalted Flesh and boost their damage by so much more. The gold and silver pickled fowl feet at level 3 pretty much share the exact same effect. So when you consume one at level 3, it gives you the effect of both the silver and gold foot. So I would actually save these for an end of day 2 boss, because every time that you consume them, you're not only going to get bonus runes, but you also have a pretty decent chance of finding a Wending Grace. Now, outside of those items, there really isn't going to be too much else that's like super important. When it comes to like being a support-based character, the throwing knives at level 3 can debuff, but they're only debuff characters to make them take 2% more damage for 40 seconds, but they actually can stack up to 20% more damage taken. So any single time that you are going up against just one singular boss, just having one whole pouch dedicated to your throwing knives at level 3 and then spamming them at the start is a perfectly viable strategy. And also, as I mentioned earlier, being that you can infinitely buy throwing daggers, you can easily get these things to level 3 just in day 1 alone. Which I didn't really talk about it much, but these merchants are going to be your best friends, because it can just help you buy an infinite amount of these items just so you can level it up. Like just constantly stack up on the turtlenecks to upgrade the consumables, stack up on fire pots so you can just increase your pot damage, stack up on the throwing knives, the warming stones, which is going to be one of the downsides. If you want to get the most out of this character, you're going to have to waste a lot of time consuming all these items and going through every single box and going through the inventory of the merchants. Like, it can be pretty time consuming, and it can take a lot of brain power just constantly thinking of all these different things and keeping track of like what level certain types of things are at. Now, I haven't really talked much about the damaging based items out there, which there are a lot when it comes to things like the glintstone scraps, the cuckoo glintstones, the gravity stone chunks. Those also can do very decent damage at level 3 and come alongside some decent passive effects. But the unfortunate thing is that by the time that you actually gather enough of these items to try and level them up to level 3, you're not going to really have too many left over to be able to benefit off the level 3 damage. So there might be certain circumstances where you do go past a bunch of enemies and you find some starlight shards to level up these certain types of damaging items, and you can stack up on a whole bunch of them and they can just potentially melt some early game bosses. It can be nice in that area, but I think this pots will do it way more reliably, because you can actually just buy an infinite amount of fire pots. Now, outside of the fire pots, kind of the same thing applies. You can only get them at very specific points of interest, and you're not going to really be stacking up on too many of them. I kind of wish there was like another way to where you can like reliably get more different types of pots. But even then, a level 3 pot is only going to be doing a certain amount of damage, and you can't really go beyond that, because all these types of throwable items don't scale of anything. So once they hit level 3, that's it. That's pretty much their cap. Like, outside of picking up some random weapon passives to further enhance the damage, there's not really much else that you can do. Even if you have lots of throwing pots types of relics, at least for the base game, by the time that you get to day 3, your pots damage is going to fall off dramatically. However, in day 1, pots are honestly broken. What I do for every single scholar expedition is, as soon as I interact with a merchant, I just stack up on so many pots. I'll have like 12 or like 20 different fire pots just stacked up, and by the time that I get to the day 1 boss, I'll have like a level 3 fire pot, and I just keep spamming them over and over again, and it can easily melt a boss. Now, past day 1, they're not going to be as useful, and at that point, I like to stack up on other more valuable things, like boiled crabs, warming stones, and exalted flesh. Now, when it comes to other items that I haven't really talked about, greases can be very powerful, but greases don't really matter as much if you're not going to be going with like a damaging based character. But if you do have like a damage build in mind, then stacking up on grease can be very beneficial, especially if you are using the physical damage increase alongside grease relic, which is kind of more of a build that's going to be for Deep of Night. I did mention it earlier, but the warming stones can be very good because the range is a bit further, it does heal for a bit more, and it also can do some revive damage. Now, it's not going to be doing much revive damage, but you can just like throw it on top of a corpse just to be able to like delay the revive a little bit longer. When it comes to the perfumes and the crystal tiers, they're honestly not that abundant to the point where you're really going to be seeing many level 3s of these particular items. Once again, if there was like a more consistent way to trying to get these things, especially spark aromatics, I'd love to make some perfume types of builds, because spark aromatics can do a lot of damage at level 3, but it's just not worth trying to look for and build around. There can be some synergy with the cracked tiers if you have some relics that have you start off with really powerful ones. Like a thorny cracked tier, for example, at level 2 can offer over 70% more damage. I kind of wish that the cracked tiers could also be like shared to your allies where the items confer ally effect, but unfortunately that's not the case. But one thing that actually is potentially worth building around, or at least worth using, is going to be some of the tools, mainly the Wraith Calling Bell. I did mention it earlier, but being that he does have some pretty poor stats, you can start off with a Wraith Calling Bell, which can do some respectable damage, especially early on, because it is just flat damage. It cannot be increased by levels or whatever. But with the passive ability of this character, at level 3, it's actually going to be offering 30% more damage. And if you find some like magic damaging up passives along the way, you can be doing some decent damage at a distance and sitting at a distance and like just keeping your allies buffed and whatnot. It can be a perfectly fine strategy, but with his B scaling and FP, it can synergize perfectly fine, and it still can be very easy to use. But yeah, I can spend like an entire 30 minutes just talking about this one passive ability alone. But if you do want like a TLDR as to how I play this character with his passive, is that you're just always going through boxes and just like eating random stuff off the ground, stack up on throwing knives and fire pots early on, make sure you're always buying pouches, make sure you have like 16 pots for day 1 so you can just keep spamming it, and then in day 2, just make sure you always have at least 1 pouch for throwing knives, and just keep the rest for things like warming stones, exalted flesh, pickled turtlenecks, and boiled crabs or prawns. Okay, moving on into his character skill, Analyze. Like this thing can easily seem to be like the most useless character skill, but you also look at it in another light and it's like, damn, this thing can be really powerful too. But there is a lot going on with this skill. Now what it does is that it spawns in this circle and all enemies within this circle do get analyzed and scanned, and the more that you scan them, the more benefits that you will gain. There are 2 different buttons that you can press in this state, either L2 or R2, L2 being a debuff and R2 being a self buff. And these are all split up into 3 separate tiers. Obviously, once a circle has reached max, you will gain the maximum tier. But to start off with the debuff, at tier 1, which basically means you can just click it as soon as the enemies spawn in your circle. It will debuff them to make them deal roughly 15% less damage. Once the circle gets filled up around about halfway, it'll do like a second debuff to make them deal roughly 20% less damage, which for a comparison, that's essentially like using a boiled crab, which is 20% damage negation, and all those things can stack together, so you definitely can help keep your teammates alive. And at level 3 and when fully maxed out, enemies get debuffed to take 60% more damage on their next hit. Which if you are in solo or if you are like in a team that's like coordinated and communicating, you can try and manipulate it in a way where you can have like the maximum amount of damage to take advantage of this debuff. But for the most part, when you are playing trios, it's hard to really take advantage of this debuff because yeah, there can very well be cases where like that 60% more damage applies to an ultimate attack, but there's a lot more cases where that 60% more damage might be applied to some like random bow attack. And being that your character as well isn't going to be like a super hard hitting type of character and is going to rely more on status effects, it's not going to really synergize that well either. So for the most part, when I am debuffing, I'm just going to go to about halfway and it's activated at that point. Now when it does come to the self-imposed buff, it is just going to apply stamina to your character. And this buff does last about 40 seconds, which the extra bit of stamina can be nice. It can help keep you alive sometimes if you like just spamming dodge. I do like to use it when like enemies are already debuffed because the debuff does last long enough to where you can easily use a buff for yourself. But it definitely is like lower priority. But at tier 3, it does spawn in this protective bubble that pretty much negates all damage. It actually does damage to enemies in return and it sends them flying and staggers very well. And it can be to the point that it can even stagger Night Lord bosses and stagger them out of combos. Now, unfortunately, it does only last like 1 second, so it pretty much is designed as a parry. The amount of times that it does come up, though, isn't really that often. And even if you do manage to pull it off, the amount of times where you actually pulled it off in a circumstance that actually benefited your team a lot is also pretty rare. I think the main reason why that is the case is because when you are like analyzing an enemy, it is going to take a little bit. And it is going to be risky because you have to be close to the enemy to have the analyze just go a bit faster. And you also can't guarantee that the boss is going to be aggroed towards you so the boss can actually hit you. So basically everything has to work perfectly. Like the stars have to align to make sure that you get this parry off and have it to where your team can benefit. But it definitely can be very powerful when you are communicating with your team, because you can just have your teammates just be like, hey, look, stand behind me. I'm going to use this bubble. It's going to stagger them, and we're going to get a free opening for a few seconds, especially if you can manipulate a really powerful and annoying attack to try and counter from like a Night Lord boss or like a regular boss, like a Magma Worm charging, for instance. Now, the bubble itself actually can do some decent amount of damage, At level 1, it actually is 300 damage, which that's basically just as much damage as like a wilder ultimate attack at level 1. Now, the unfortunate part is that it also does 300 damage at level 15, so it doesn't really scale, but you're not really using it for damage or stance damage anyway. But if you did want to know the stance damage values, it's about just as much stance damage as like a fully charged heavy attack. But the character skill overall is very like quick and easy to use. For the most part, you're just like applying a debuff to an enemy to just make them deal less damage. But being that it takes a long time to try and like fully fill up the circle when you are at these further distances, you're not really getting into a circumstance where you're trying to get to the tier 3 buff or debuff anyway, and also they're not really going to be as powerful. So almost any single time that I'm using it, I'm basically just tapping it, which you kind of want to be doing along your expedition, because the more that you use this character skill, the shorter the amount of time it takes to fully analyze something. Okay, now as for his ultimate art, Communion, thankfully, this one is going to be a lot more simple and easy to explain. Basically, how it works is that it does apply this mark to all enemies and allies in this like wide AoE. And what this does for the enemies is it makes them take shared damage, and what it does for the allies is pretty much gain lifesteal. So when you damage the enemies, they all get damaged and we all get healed. Pretty simple stuff. Now, the shared damage that these other enemies take is only 20% of the maximum damage, which definitely is decent enough. It might not seem like it's much, but when you do go up against these like gank boss fights, you definitely notice how much faster you can kill some enemies. And this thing is an absolute godsend for the Everdark Libra expedition. Not even just the Everdark Libra fight itself, like the entire expedition, because you can get things like Freya or Tibia Mariner, which are fights that can be an absolute snooze fest and a pain in the ass sometimes, but this one ultimates can just make very quick work of them. Now, unfortunately, status effect damage is not shared to other allies, but it does actually work when it comes to proccing Iron Eye marks. It does actually work with the Duchess restage as well, which is nice. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to be the most valuable thing in a one-on-one boss fight, because the only thing that it's really going to be doing is just offering some lifesteal. But thankfully, in this day and age, with all these Undertakers going around, as long as you have an ultimate attack, doesn't really matter what it does, it's actually going to be a benefit, so you might as well use it. But there are going to be some relic abilities out there that definitely can help out these character skills. Since we were talking about the ultimate, I might as well talk about the one that does boost the ultimate, and that it offers a damage over time effect for as long as the ultimate is active. And the damage that he actually gets with this particular relic is comparable to a lot of the other ultimates in the game. It's not going to be as much as things like an Undertaker or a Wilder, but it is going to be enough to where you can quickly melt an entire room full of enemies. And this ultimate can go through walls as well. So it can go up really high, down through walls. So you can kill all these trash mobs and actually get all your health back just by clicking this one button. It definitely is going to be one of the more desirable relics to get. But when it does come to the most important relic perk that he has, it is going to be the one that does boost his allies when they are targeted with the character skill. Now, obviously, this one is just meant for trios, but most of the time that you do want to play the Scholar is going to be in trios or duos anyway. Now, even though his character skill doesn't really do anything to boost his allies in itself, I kind of wish the self-imposed buff of the stamina and the bubble was also applied to allies. That probably would have made it a lot cooler, but thankfully we actually have this relic perk that can damage boost your allies. And this is a very good buff. It boosts your allies' damage by 20% for the next 30 seconds. Now that is just for weapons. For spells, it is a 15% damage boost, which is still amazing, just having that much more damage for free, basically, as long as the Scholar is just looking at you. And no, you don't even have to have the circle fully charged just to be able to gain this benefit. As long as there is an enemy in your point of view that has the circle at least partially filled up, and if your allies are also in that circle, they're just going to gain that damage boost. And having it last 30 seconds means you don't have to really worry about it that much for every single time that you do get your character skill back. But yeah, if you do plan to play support-based Scholar, this is probably the second most important relic overall to get, right behind the items confer effects to allies, as I'll talk about that in a bit. He does also have another perk that does prevent the slowing of the character skill, which if you don't know, when you do lock off to an enemy, it does like passively drain over time, and this helps slightly prevent that, which that's only really useful if you want to be able to get it to max, which as I mentioned earlier, I'm always just tapping the character skill anyway, or getting it to halfway, which doesn't really take that much time. Because just like the regular tier 1 or tier 2 debuff is enough, but if you do really plan on using the parries, this is going to be extremely beneficial, because with this relic, you can actually store the parry to make it be a quick reactionary thing, which even if it does drain a little bit, that's going to be perfectly fine, because if you also don't know, the Analyze skill actually does charge up faster in the middle of a boss combo. So it is a very niche relic, but it does actually have a use. And the last character-specific relic does offer this character more runes for every unique enemy that he does analyze. Now, just as I talked about with like the more that you use the analyze skill, the less time it actually will take to fully analyze, that's actually based on how many new enemies that you do interact with. And this perk kind of works the exact same way. You are going to get 1300 runes for every new enemy that you analyze. So for instance, let's just say that you analyzed a dog. For the rest of the expedition, every time that you analyze a dog, you're not going to get any boosted runes. And the amount of money that you can gain is pretty good. I did an entire expedition where I tried my best to analyze every new enemy I could find, and I got just under 50,000 runes from this relic alone. Which 50,000 runes is like just enough for like one level at like these later levels, which is pretty decent. But if there's any character that I would like to have bonus amounts of runes, it would be this one, because you will be spending lots of money on these items to try and level them up. So it's not going to be the worst perk of all time. I'd only really run this if you had it in combination with other really important things, which thankfully the game does give you a relic that has this perk in combination with double pouches, which is really good. Now, when it comes to the non-character specific relics, if you are playing in a team, the most important one is obviously going to be items confer effects to allies, because as I mentioned with the passive ability, all these broken ass buffs that you can stack up on and gain lots of benefits like 30% more health and 30% more damage negation. You can just have these be shared to your allies and have it last an entire minute. And you can stack up on 4 of these, so you can just keep spamming them throughout the fight and just give your allies these amazing buffs. But outside of that, if you were going to play Support Scholar, stacking up on more pouches is really good. Having you start off with a Wraith Calling Bell or a status effect can be really good. I think Bloodblade is probably going to be his best damaging option he can start with. When it comes to things like increased pot throwing damage, I wouldn't have it be a priority, but if it came in combination with something else really good, then yeah, definitely run it. But as I mentioned earlier, all those like damaging based throwables, I'm not going to really care as much beyond day 1, and especially for the regular game mode too. Now, I've mentioned this earlier, but he does have some stat changing relics. He has one that does improve his mind and reduce his vigor, which honestly, I would never run this at all. I don't really know why you would like to have more vigor with a character that doesn't really have any good intelligence or faith. There is no catalyst that scales off arcane either. And the only things that you could possibly have that will be using FP would be like a Wraith Calling Bell, but that's already super cheap and you can just like stack up on things like Starlight Shards anyway. I just don't think this relic is worth it at all, especially because you have to drain your health in the process. However, he does have another character-specific relic in the one that improves his endurance and dexterity at the cost of intelligence and arcane, which sacrificing his already mediocre intelligence scaling is basically not a loss at all. Now, sacrificing his arcane can be a big deal, but even with this arcane loss, he still ends up having more arcane than the Executor, but he just ends up having more endurance and actually just as much dexterity as somebody like the Iron Eye. So if you just really hated just dedicating this character just for status effect spam or using things like Wraith Calling Bell or having to always start off with a Bloodblade, then I would definitely use this relic because it is guaranteed to have good damage no matter what. His thrusting swords will output some decent damage. And if you find any really good like dexterity arcane option like a Reduvia, a Bloody Hellas, a Rivers of Blood, those can all be really good. So if you actually wanted to go into a damaging based scholar build, then you could run something like this and maybe run like dormant katanas or dormant heavy thrusting swords and fish for the Rivers of Blood or Bloody Hellas and get some very good damage. Which yeah, you might think that you're sacrificing Support Scholar just to be able to gain this role, but the only perk that you need to play Support Scholar is items confer effects to allies. As long as you have that one perk, then you can very well just go all into damage based scholar as well. Maybe you might have to sacrifice the relic perk that gives your allies a damage boost when they're targeted by the character skill, but if you're sacrificing that to have good damage yourself, then honestly that just might end up being better. Like I'd rather have my scholar teammate also just do really good damage instead of doing really shit damage and just boosting me with 15% more damage every now and then. Now obviously you can get lucky with relics and end up running both, but yeah, this dexterity relic is fantastic. It just completely mitigates the majority of his downsides. Unfortunately, there is only like one way to get this relic perk, and that is if you buy it off the collector's signboard. So therefore you can't actually have this perk in combination with other really important stuff. So that's like the only downside when it comes to running this perk in the base game at least. Once again, we'll talk about Deeper Night later on. Anyway, my overall thoughts on this character is that he can be very powerful, but he definitely is designed to be a supporting-based character with how his passive ability in combination with other types of relics will work. But even then, the supporting-based role is going to be very niche because there's going to be a lot of circumstances to where your team would just rather you be a damaging based character instead of just like standing back and supporting your allies, just having them do a little bit more damage or giving them like a little bit more health. Because it's not like you're going to be having boiled crabs on hand throughout the entire expedition. You're really just going to be saving them for the final Night Lord fight. And even then, there's still plenty of cases where I play the Scholar and I have teammates that are taking all the aggro because I'm standing further back, and they're still dying really quickly even with a boiled crab buff. And the Scholar doesn't do a good enough job when it comes to carrying. So if you are the best player on your team, I would rather you not play the Scholar, but the Scholar is also a character that is going to be a higher skill ceiling, so I would recommend the better players play him as well to maximize his potential. So I definitely think this character is more fine-tuned for Deep of Night, because to really maximize his potential, he has to pick up all these different items and consume them and track the level of the items and go visit merchants and spend money, which takes a lot of time. And there's plenty of times where I play the Scholar and my teammates go ahead and actually start killing bosses and I'm lagging behind. And this can be very true in solo as well. I think this character is just not that good of a solo player because mainly his dodge is just not going to be that good in keeping him alive. And that he is a character that is reliant on his passive ability and stacking up on all these items, which is going to waste more time and more money. And with how important Wending Graces are in solo, that's actually going to take up more item slots, which the item slots are extremely valuable to this character. There are certain builds that you can make to make him do really good damage while having good combination and support, so he's never going to be a bad character. But the best thing that somebody can do when it comes to supporting your teammates is reviving reliably. And other characters like the Revenant and the Guardian just tend to do that better. But obviously this character is better at keeping people alive to begin with, so there's still going to be use cases for this character. And he still is going to be a very flexible character at that as well. So I do think that he does sit comfortably in the A tier. But yeah, that's basically everything I wanted to talk about in this one. If there is anything I missed, which I guarantee I would have, because the Scholar is a very complex character that has lots going on, definitely let me know down in the comments below. But if you do appreciate this content, please do like and subscribe. I have more videos coming out along the way. And also do follow me on Twitch because I'm live there every day doing all this testing and playing the game, doing challenge runs or whatnot. So definitely pop by if you haven't already. Anyway, catch you guys around. See yous.